Hey everyone, this review of Cyberpunk 2077 is spoiler free, so if you haven't finished the game, you're still safe to watch this entire video. Cyberpunk 2077 is a futuristic open world game in which you play as a mercenary who gets caught up in a game of high stakes survival inside the dark streets of Night City. V's quest in this beautiful yet messy steampunk world is slow to start, asking players to waddle through a multi-hour prologue filled with a huge amount of dialogue, character building, and unhurried introductions. This game is not for the impatient. Throughout it, you'll be asked to listen, follow, and walk more than play. Sit and wait for people to tell you their stories, or muddle on about their problems as you stare outside a flying car at beautiful, dark, and futuristic scenery that's only marred by distant, low-resolution building models and traffic that do stick out like a sore thumb. After this introduction, the open world is of course yours to explore, but if you stick mainly to the story, you'll still find yourself tethered to these very long, slow-moving cutscenes that can outstay their welcome. Not because in any way they're boring, the style of Cyber is actually nothing short of awesome. The game can just feel very overbearing with how much sit and tell there is all the time. Long car rides, city benches, a stool at a yakitori bar. You'll get used to just plopping your ass down and being talked to, sometimes without being able to skip the chit-chat. They often overstay their welcome as the game consistently struggles to link everything together. The voice acting in this game is top tier and always draws you in, but the game's characters have a problem with executing their actions in these conversations, often finishing a line of dialogue and then just standing there like a statue for 5 seconds while figuring out what to do or say next. It's weird, sometimes characters just stare at you for an uncomfortable amount of time, like they're gazing into the void as the underlying game code just tries to play catch up. The whole experience can feel kind of clunky, especially with how the game makes you follow people at a different rate than you can walk or run. A 15-year-old annoyance for anyone who hates any escort mission ever made in the original World of Warcraft. Because the game relies so heavily on you either sitting in a designated spot, listening, or following a friend who doesn't feel the need to walk briskly or run, the story presentations can be very taxing after a while despite having great voice work and a variety of player choice. Choice in Cyber is an interesting subpoint in this regard, as you're given lots of opportunity to chime in on the chatter, and the breadth of optional blue dialogue options ensure your curiosity and thirst for context can be satiated. The game does a wonderful job at giving players all the information and history and backstory that they could ever want, but still keeping its finer details fairly vague, which is pretty much the catalyst for the entire story and a great way to keep players engaged. But you shouldn't be expecting your decision making to make much difference beyond romance, side quests, and the ending cutscene. Your life choice affects a small introduction scene and opens up new dialogue options, but these don't actually lead to any outcome changes in the actual story. You have a handful of choices to make that affect minor characters, yet only one or two that seriously impact future gameplay. You can unlock a new quest or cutscene in some of those choices, but inside the actual narrative, you can't do too much that fundamentally alters the story itself. Gameplay-wise, you do have a lot of choice in how you want to tackle things though. Players spend skill and attribute points in different trees to tailor a certain playstyle. This includes guns, hacking, melee, or stealth, and you certainly have space to specialize in one particular role, and the game's combat encounters, for the exception of some spongy bosses that encourage a very finger-on-the-trigger playstyle, for the most part do allow you to capitalize on what you invested in. You can spend the entire game in the shadows, you can go guns blazing, and the game has a pretty cool hacking mechanic if you want to go down that road, which lets you disable cameras and hack into enemy bioware. From a mechanical standpoint, it's nothing mind-blowing. You point the cursor at a bad dude and hit a button. But because the game has a variety of different hacking options, especially ones that help you circumvent combat or make it easier, it does fit right in, and it makes also complete sense in the context of its setting. The gunplay and stealth is above average and far better than most RPG first-person combat, but it still doesn't hold up to an actual FPS. Guns are surprisingly satisfying as they pack a punch and have great animations, and there are some interesting mechanics in play like smart aim, status effects, and ricochet that add a little bit of variety that the game needs. It can be a bit messy and spammy at times, especially with the mantis blades and pretty much all melee attacks, but for this type of game I was actually pleased with the combat. Mechanically speaking, it does have its problems, in fact beyond combat in general, especially when playing on a gamepad. Some are minor, some are major, like the game's current bug on the PS5 gamepad of having to hit the sprint key 3 to 4 times before it works. This is a fatal flaw, especially when you can die in a split second on hard mode. There's certainly also an over-reliance on dashing, which amplifies this issue, and there's no parkour or wall running, despite the game having a pretty sweet run, jump, slide, and hitbox lean animation suite, which is similar, albeit much more pedestrian, to Mirror's Edge. It's just a shame that there's nothing really interesting in the skill trees to elevate that core gameplay experience in the process. Dumping more points into a particular attribute gives you access to more options in its corresponding skill tree, which doesn't make you more powerful, but most of the trees are nothing more than simple stat boosters. Role-playing in Cyberpunk means picking up skills like 5% more damage or +1 to hacking, which is something I was really unhappily surprised to see. +100 armor isn't exactly something anyone's going to get excited for, because because it doesn't alter the gameplay other than making it less hard or less easy. This kind of incremental upgrading fails to make the RPG system of Cyberpunk actually exciting. As you know, when you level up, you're just going to get another boring, marginal upgrade. Where are the cool skills and augmentations that radically change your playstyle? Sadly, they're few and far between. Other aspects to the RPG-ness in Cyberpunk are also strikingly absent, such as the ability to upgrade and change your character cosmetically. Why can't I cut off my arm and replace it with a robotic enhancement and have it painted hot pink? Why can't I get a haircut? In fact, why doesn't anything about your character visually change when you install cyberware, prosthetics, or body parts at the Ripper? None of the changes you make for the exception of your arms alters the way your character actually looks. One of the things the Cyberpunk lore talks about so heavily is this idea that Night City is a place of individualism and expression, and that you gotta look cool while kicking ass. Like, where's the body mass, height, and weight slider in the character creator? Where's the plastic surgery or tattoo shop? The lack of any way to actually create your true cyberpunk in this fashion is a big letdown, especially with how the gear system ties cosmetics and armor rating together. For like half of my playthrough, my character looked like a complete moron because for some reason a baby blue bicycle helmet and pink jumpers had more armor than anything else I had. Yeah, where's the option not to show helmets and pants and stuff in the inventory screen? That's a basic feature. It's such a missed opportunity because the game otherwise has great style. Cyberpunk's rich futuristic world is pretty incredible actually, and there were plenty of times I stopped in my tracks to, smell the roses per se. Graphically speaking, the game isn't too great on the eyes, and as I said before, the assets in the far distance look really terrible in low resolution, but the overall fictional aesthetics are pretty fantastic. They've done a great job creating interesting architecture, characters, and environments, and V's companions are really well designed too. The entire lore beyond the game is captivating too, a dark city corrupted by corporations, barely hanging on to control in the wake of crime, uprising, and people's pursuits of freedom, and sometimes anarchy. The story's conflicts take place under the limelight of enrapturing context from corporate espionage to cyberpsychosis to V's personal quest of survival, which takes the form of a variety of different things. An identity crisis, the loss of loved and damned, quest for vengeance, obscure betrayal, sometimes leaning on the human element of empathy or a dark tragedy. Cyber runs the gauntlet of it all and wraps its complicated and exciting story around them to make you feel connections to V and the people surrounding. Keanu as Johnny plays a huge role in this as well and is certainly a great companion for the entire game. When a game creates a character who's an absolute dick, but you still care about him, they've done something right. It's not the kind of game that evokes simple notions or holds on to any thread for too long. People die fast and the train keeps moving. Everything has a catch, a twist. And despite a very slow start, it ramps up fast until the end. It's just a damn shame that it's sometimes hard to get immersed into it with the game's various problems. For one, even though the beauty of the world is undeniable, the pieces moving inside of it are quite sterile. In an open world game, you expect the NPCs inside of it to feel real and have their own schedules. Night City's citizens are actually quite dumb. In fact, it seems they have very little AI put into their routines. There's no real-time events happening outside scripted quest marker sequences, nothing really happens organic, no one fights with each other or seems to walk 15 feet from their own personal station. When they're in cars, it's even worse. They drive around like they're on a rail system, crash into or pull in front of them, and they'll just sit there in their car staring at you like you're Jesus. They never move. You can literally create the world's biggest traffic jam by standing in front of a single car. Why don't cars have physics in this game? Why doesn't anyone react to anything outside of a gunshot? When they're in their cars, why do they jerk all over the place and smash into everything like they're bumper cars? When you commit a crime, why do cops magically spawn behind you? Why is there no realistic police AI to chase you around? In fact, why is there no crime system in this game at all? Worse, there's really no interacting with any of it. You can't grab anything or sit down anywhere outside of cutscenes. You can't use sinks, bathrooms, order drinks. You can't look at your phone. You can't play music. You can't dance on the dance floor, examine your weapon, purchase property, or play the game's various arcade systems around the city, which there are so many. You can't interact or customize your car, the dashboard, your apartment. There's no parking lots or garages, and most shop doors are locked shut. This stuff really took me out of the experience because it just breaks immersion. And in an RPG such as this, that is of vital importance. Cyberpunk has a great central story that, while it is pretty overbearing with its presentation, is fun and unique. Its most poignant moments can be found in its companion side quests, and you'll find lots of cool mini-stories here that will keep you wanting more. That's due to the fact that most of these characters are quite diverse and very well acted. The combat is pretty fun, and you do have the option to play however you want. Hacking is really fun as well, and the world is beautiful, albeit quite sterile. It's certainly worth being called a pretty good game, but it is not the game of the decade as many people hoped it would be. It has tremendous flaws and tons of missed opportunities. Braindance, the touted virtual detection feature, is not available outside story missions even though V owns a headset. There's a distinct lack of organic events happening in the world to make it feel alive. NPCs act like robots most of the time, and the absence of driving intelligence and physics makes the game feel extremely juvenile at times. In fact, the driving itself is also nothing special. The crafting system is an afterthought, and the skill tree and attribute system is extremely disappointing in what it offers. There's more bugs, crashes, and frame drops than you could possibly imagine as well, and the loot system is intrusive, way overdone, and extremely distracting. Cyberpunk is a pretty good game with a pretty strong identity. It seems like so much of the work, though, was put into developing its endless lore, the complex story, and the downright fantastic performances of its cast, yet they kind of forgot about or just didn't have enough time to bring everything else up to that level. Cyber is the product of when extreme gaming fanaticism and overhype collide. It's a game that needs at least 6 more months in development and should not have been released in both the state and inconsistent quality that it was. But I still enjoyed my time with it, although it's probably a game that will likely fade from my memory faster than I ever thought it would.